Welcome to the Massachusetts General Hospital Frontal Temporal Disorders Unit Community Forum Friday. Today's session is Understanding Legal Planning After a Young Onset Diagnosis of Alzheimer's Disease, Frontal Temporal Dementia, or a related condition. A conversation with attorney Pam Greenfield. My name is Katie Brandt. I'm the Director of Caregiver Support Services and Public Relations for the MGH FTD unit, and I'll be your host for today's session. Pam Greenfield is the founder of Greenfield Planning Group. Pam's roots are in elder law and long-term care planning for senior citizens. She has a passion for helping seniors and their loved ones navigate through the continuum of care as they age and advising them on how to properly finance their options. Attorney Greenfield focuses her practice in elder law, asset protection planning, and complex mass health applications and appeals. She additionally represents families and skilled nursing facilities in guardianship and conservatorship matters, as well as probate and estate administration. Attorney Greenfield is also an estate planning attorney for clients of all ages. She is especially connected to her clients with young children because she is a working mom of 2 boys and understands the financial and emotional challenges that new parents face. She prides herself in simple yet complete, cost-effective estate planning for all of her clients, young and old. Pam, welcome. Welcome to our session today.
Thanks, Katie. It's lovely to be here on this almost spring day. I'm channeling the spring with my yellow blazer. I thought we would have some warm vibes coming in as I look at the forecast, and it's going to be in the high 40s.
Isn't it funny? That's like a real New Englander thing to say, that like, oh, spring's almost here, it's 40. But I felt that way too. I left my winter coat at home. I wore my lighter jacket.
I have a black lab, so I told him that as long as the temperature is over 28 degrees, we can go for a walk any day. So he looks at the temperature every day.
I mean, it makes sense that you would have a really smart pet at home, right? Well, Pam, I'm so glad to have you. You are an amazing expert attorney, but also we've invited you because, you time and time again have provided education and support and guidance for families in our FTD unit community. I feel like you do a really great job of connecting with sort of our atypical families, and that's something that's so important when we think about families receiving a diagnosis that they didn't expect. Now they need to make plans for the future. And what we were hoping is that you would talk about, like, if they're starting to make legal plans, what are some of the things that they need to think about?
Yeah. So I was Katie and I were chatting before we started here today, and I was saying, I'd say about 60% of my practice is seniors, seniors who are facing typically senior illnesses and diagnoses like Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and other, related chronic conditions that impact the elderly. And those of my clients tend to be in their 70s, 80s, 90s, even to 100. And then I have another group of clients who are young families who have minor children, or maybe they have children who are about to go to college, or young adult children. And it's sort of, a part of my practice is over here and a part of my practice is over here. And then sometimes those two worlds sort of converge. And those are the cases Katie and I often work on together, where they're younger families who've received a typically older diagnosis. Those are the young onset dementia cases, the FTD cases. And the planning approach is really, it draws from both arenas, but it's really unique. It's a unique flavor of estate planning and disability planning that is sort of emerging. And I mentioned I'm the chapter president for 2021 for Mass NALA, and it's a little bit of a personal goal of mine to have that area be more explored, have the education be better, and have practitioners really have a more working foundation to assist clients in this ever growing area.
Yeah, because you think about getting a diagnosis at any stage is really challenging. But I think that we know from working with families that to receive a dementia diagnosis at a young age when you're still fully working, parenting children, kind of at the prime of your life, that is a really unique assault.
Yeah.
And to then have to walk into an attorney's office who maybe has never worked with anybody with a young onset dementia, if it would, maybe it would be their first time, like navigating some of those legal issues, that could feel kind of unsettling for families.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult for my healthy 40 and 50-year-old clients to come in, who have young kids and have busy lives. It's scary enough for those folks to come in when they are working and they're healthy and they haven't had a diagnosis like that. Layer onto it, that kind of a huge life-altering diagnosis. It's really difficult for families. And our approach here is to really be as compassionate as possible and meet people where they are, and really take the time, and do it with a lot of love and a lot of compassion and empathy. And there are certain things that everybody needs. So I sort of like to go into this spiel that, like, there are documents that everybody needs, regardless of your age, your health, and your wealth. If you're over the age of 18, you need these basic decision-making documents. So even for my clients who have kiddos who are headed off to college, I urge them to send their 18-year-olds to me to get these documents in place. So often, it's a nice way to start the conversation because it normalizes it for families and says, you healthy spouse, you need these documents just as much as you spouse who's struggling with a recent diagnosis. And those documents really are healthcare documents. So super important to get a good, solid healthcare proxy in place. And, you can sign the form that MGH has, that you would get at the hospital or the doctor's office. And that's certainly better than nothing. And I've had plenty of clients that have signed those forms and not been able to sign more robust versions of those forms. And I'm certainly thrilled and relieved that they had those in their file anyway. But if you have the ability to plan with an attorney, getting a good set of healthcare documents can be critical. So we're talking about a healthcare proxy, which allows you to name somebody to make a medical decision for you if you can't do it yourself. And usually I have clients name a primary person and an alternate, and then as many alternates as they want. And then also we do a HIPAA release form, which is just a general blanket HIPAA release form that says, these are my approved people that can call any of my medical professionals and access medical records. So you might have your own with your primary care or with the hospital, but this is a general HIPAA release form that can be sent to anywhere. That's a really nice thing to do too, because a healthcare proxy, as we know, needs to be activated by a doctor. So I have plenty of clients who find themselves in a situation where they're still their own decision maker, but the kids and the spouse might need to be part of the conversation and might need to have their own separate conversation with the physician. So that winds up being a really critical document, especially in the younger population. And I also do a living will, which is really a statement of the client's wishes for end-of-life care treatment. So this is really different from a MOLST form, which you would get at the hospital, which is a medical order for life-sustaining treatment, or a DNR. A living will is a lot more subtle. It sort of says to your healthcare agent, look, if I'm in a situation where the doctors are saying there's nothing that can be done for me, I'm in a persistent vegetative state or an irreversible coma, I would not want to be kept alive on life support machines. And I find that document is so powerful, more than anything, for the decision maker, because I can't tell you how many decision makers, how many children, how many spouses have sat in my office and said, I had to make this incredibly difficult decision. not really knowing what my spouse's wishes would have been or what my mother's wishes would have been. So I call this my let your loved ones off the hook document, because it really says to them, I'm making this decision while I'm competent, while I'm healthy, and I want you to be my eyes and ears and carry it out. So it's a really powerful thing for families.
I think that what you just said is so important. We talk a lot about personhood and dignity at every stage. And early in the diagnosis journey, you might feel like, well, I'm not close to being in a late stage situation, so I don't need to look at those documents right now.
Right.
But what a gift, right, to you as an individual living with a diagnosis, and a gift to your loved ones to put your voice down on paper, and so that that voice can be honored to the best of everyone's ability.
Yeah. And it's equally as important for the healthy client as it is for the client facing a difficult diagnosis, because none of us has any idea when, that day is coming for us. And some of us have a long time, have a chronic illness that, has a life expectancy, and some people have a major medical event, and they woke up that morning and they thought their life was going to go on as totally normal as any other day, and it just didn't. So that's why it's just equally as important for our healthy clients as it is for our clients facing a diagnosis.
I
So,
think that's a
sorry,
good
go ahead.
message too, because, well, sometimes people don't want to go to the attorney if they're living
Right.
with a diagnosis. They're like, oh, another thing that I have to do because I'm sick. No, this is something that everybody needs.
Yeah, it really is. And to be honest, it's, for our clients that haven't had a challenging diagnosis, it's really an opportunity to give your kids a gift, so that they don't have to wind up rushing around and going into court and spending extra time and money in an attorney's office. This is an opportunity to do it in a moment of peace and say, I've thought about this and I've considered this, and I'm taking control of this decision instead of just sort of leaving it up to chance. So it's really, really
Yeah.
important stuff.
Now let's say you're a couple in your early 50s, and maybe you receive this young onset dementia diagnosis, but you would say, well, we already did all those documents. We have a healthcare proxy and all those things. What would you say to a couple like that?
So, it's so going back to the other documents. So I'll touch on that and then I'll come back to that question, which is, the other two really super important basic documents that all of our clients need are a durable power of attorney, which, much like the healthcare proxy, allows the client to name a point person to handle their finances, which is, a really powerful and important role. This is a person that's going to stand in your shoes and make financial decisions, from what deductions you take on your taxes to, where and what kind of care you're going to receive and how you're going to pay for that. Really, big role is the power of attorney. And then the last document is just a simple will. These are my assets and these are where these assets are going when I pass away. This is who is going to be my executor or personal representative to carry out my wishes. And then I'll come back to this, but the will is also the place where our clients with minor children name a guardian for their kids. So I'll touch on that in a moment. But to your question about the 50-year-old couple that comes in and they've already done this plan, they did this plan when their kids were 5 and 7 and in their late 30s or early 40s, and now it's 10 years later, 15 years later. The question is, are those point people still the right point people? So for any clients, healthy or young or older or having received a diagnosis, you really should pull out your estate plan every 3 to 5 years and just take a peek at it and make sure that, you haven't had a falling out with that best friend that you said was going to be the guardian of your kids, or, maybe you've named somebody like a parent, and on some of my documents, I initially had named my parents in those roles when 10 years ago when I first did those documents, and now my parents wouldn't be the right choice in those roles anymore because they themselves are in need of assistance. So it's looking at those documents and seeing if the people you've chosen are still the right people. Simple stuff like updating addresses and updating contact information. And then when it comes to a tricky diagnosis, the thing that winds up being the biggest point of conversation is that spouses often appoint each other. So for a spouse, for a couple in their 50s who have named each other on everything and have said, if something happens to me, everything's going to my spouse and then to my kids in equal shares. And of course, my spouse is going to be the guardian of our minor kids. This is a moment where we might need to reevaluate that because the husband who has an Alzheimer's diagnosis might not be the right choice to make medical decisions for the wife in the event that she has a medical event. So those are really delicate conversations to have, especially depending on where the spouse with the diagnosis is in their journey. Really tricky stuff to talk about early on because it can be really emotional to think, this is really happening, and my wife needs to take me off of this document as a decision maker because I'm not in the future going to be in a position to be her decision maker. That's a really emotional moment. Less so later on, where that reality has really set in, but the rub there is we need to make sure that there is still competency to do certain things. So
Right.
we look at that stuff really closely. And I've even had clients who have said, my wife with the diagnosis would be the right person to make medical decisions for me, but she wouldn't be the right person to handle our finances. So it's not an all or nothing thing. Really have to take your time and do it slowly and methodically. And these types of cases I see these clients frequently. It's a moving target. So it's not like you're, neat wrapped up 40-year-old couple that has 3 kids that, are going to name their siblings as their guardian of the kids and trustees of their trust. And then I'll see them in 5 to 10 years. This is really hands-on, and we stay in touch with these folks.
Yeah, and I think that unfortunately we do notice with our young onset families that sometimes things do progress at a pace that does require that sort of constant checking in.
Yeah.
You know,
And then there are other aspects, Katie, like, as things progress, maybe and I keep referring to this in a couple situation, but assuming it is a couple that owns everything jointly, and maybe the first step is that the wife who is healthy says, I'm going to take my husband off as my decision maker on my healthcare proxy and power of attorney, and I'm going to name my sister instead. And maybe that's step one. And then maybe step two is, well, if something were to happen to me suddenly and all of these assets were to stay with my spouse, and there's a good power of attorney in place, that might be okay, but maybe there's something more we could do. Like maybe we could set this estate up in such a way that the assets would flow into a protective trust for the sick spouse, and then maybe some of the assets would pour into a protective trust for the minor kids. And so you really sort of give this a lot of thought as to how much control should the spouse with the diagnosis have over the assets, and weighing their independence versus their potential ability to protect these assets and lean on some of the state funded programs. And then also how to set this up in such a way that, if you have minor kids, those kids are going to need to be taken care of as well. So, if there are programs available to the spouse that might need care down the road, we like to think about how do we best set this family up so that they can take advantage of those programs, and so that the kids can, really have the assets that they need for to go to college and be as self-sufficient as they can be.
that's all incredibly emotional,
So
right?
emotional.
And so I think there were a couple things that you said that what would make me, as you know, if I had that diagnosis in my family's life, want to walk through your office doors to have these hard conversations. I feel like the thing that would propel me to have that early hard conversation is that piece that you said about competency. So that ability for the person living with the diagnosis, if they get diagnosed early, to have a voice in some of this decision-making process, not just about advanced care planning, but even things about maybe they have something special that they want to put in their will that is going to go to someone they love. And really to take that time and try to include them in the conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure that I'm a lawyer, not, I play one on TV too sometimes. But I'm certainly not a clinician, but there are, stages of grief and coming to terms with a diagnosis. I'm sure you've had, qualified speakers come in and talk to your group on that. And at the early stages, there's a huge amount of fear and denial. And that's really scary. It's really scary. And it might not be the right moment, the week after a diagnosis to come in and see the lawyer. Although I do get that phone call. I do get because there are folks who are planners and they hear this diagnosis and they say, okay, this is what it is. And it's my duty to protect my family and my kids. And I need to do this right now. There are folks that do that. But I'd say the larger majority, it's a life-changing sort of, earth-shattering moment, and you sort of need to get your bearings and get your head around it, and then move into a planning phase.
It's like a before and after moment. I think
Yeah,
people think about their lives before and their lives after.
yeah,
And what I really like about the opportunities that I've had to have conversations with you is to think about what are some of the dreams and goals that families had in their lives before that they can still have after a diagnosis.
yeah,
So, I would hope that we would talk a little bit about specifically those young onset families. And I've worked with families who've said, look, my kid's supposed to go to college in 3 years.
yeah,
And now you've hit us with this diagnosis where we might have to plan for care. How are we supposed to do that?
yeah. So
So
that's,
I would just,
yeah,
yeah.
really tricky stuff. So, when we're thinking about, there's a few different factors we're thinking about. First of all, one of the first things that crosses everybody's mind is, oh gosh, care is expensive. How are we going to pay for this? The good news, the good news there is that the state of Massachusetts is really cutting edge and at the forefront of covering care. So, Massachusetts is really unique in that, I don't know the statistics, but it's like 99% or higher of skilled nursing facilities accept the Mass Health program. So this is not a state where, like, if you are out of money or you qualify for Mass Health, you go to a lesser facility. It's, the top-notch, Harvard affiliated, best reputation facilities with the most cutting edge, state of the art advancements are covered by Mass Health. So here the moment turns to, well, okay, so we have this diagnosis and we know we have some lead-in time. Hopefully we have 3 to 5 years of lead-in time. So what, if anything, can we do now to set ourselves up for the moment where, the spouse with the diagnosis or the individual with the diagnosis has to, be in a position to need that level of care, and then can apply for these programs that will not impoverish the rest of the family. So, I get excited talking about this because these are the cases I want immediately, because these are the cases where we can really make a difference. So, I just, talking off the cuff, like if I had a client that came in and there was a diagnosis, and it's early on, and we're thinking, we have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old, and we're going to be in a position where we need to pay for college. We know that there's a Mass Health look back period, a 5-year look back period. So if you're applying for skilled nursing facility care under the Mass Health program, the state's going to ask you for 5 years of bank records and say, have you made any huge expenditures and have you made any transfers of assets? So we know that a transfer of assets means giving away money or gifting away money with an intent to qualify for Mass Health. So there's not a lot of cases out there, and this is sort of where I think that we need much more education and advocacy, where we've had young folks in skilled nursing facilities that have paid college tuition. And so how will Mass Health look at, you paid for your kid $60,000 over the course of the last 4 years to go to college? Will that impact a Mass Health application? And I can't say that the answer is definitively yes or no. Looking at the letter of the law and the regulations, the answer should be no, because that was done with an exclusive purpose that had nothing to do with Mass Health. We weren't gifting assets. We weren't shielding assets. We were paying for a college education that we were always going to pay for. And it's not outside of the realm of, what's done every day, all day. But I couldn't swear that wouldn't raise a red flag. And I couldn't swear that it wouldn't go across a caseworker's desk at a bad moment where there wasn't a mandate from on high to sort of tighten up the budget for the year. And so we could be really proactive and we could say, okay, we know college is going to cost this, and we're going to take this money out of that portfolio and put it into this separate account in a trust or in some other vehicle, start that 5-year clock knowing this is the kid's college fund. And if you do that when your kids are, 13 and 15 and you have some planning time, and then the day doesn't come that, the spouse doesn't need nursing home care for 6 or 8 years, you've taken that money and you've parked it somewhere else and you've gone through that 5-year look back period. So those are the types of things we talk about. Another thing I mentioned, I alluded to before, is everybody's eyes are always on the spouse that had the diagnosis, but my eyes are always on the well spouse because they're a caregiver. And as we know, things happen out of the blue that aren't supposed to happen and in the order they're not supposed to happen in. So one area I know that we can plan is what happens if the caretaker spouse passes away first and there are minor kids or kids that need to go to college. How do we set this estate up in such a way that that tragic moment doesn't derail the entire plan? There are certain things in life we can control and certain things we can't control. So that's one of the things we can control. We can set the well spouse up and the kids up in such a way that maybe there's a different guardian identified for the kids, or maybe there's an allotment of funds that's set aside for the kids and an allotment of funds that's set aside for the spouse who is likely going to need nursing home care now that their caregiver is no longer in the picture. So it's those two things that I really, we spend a lot of time on.
But what you're saying, I think, is so empowering, because it's this idea that you could go in and have a conversation with an attorney, even with this unusual circumstance of living with dementia and parenting children, being young, and still make choices about your future, still try and set up your financial house in a way that reflects your goals, your values as a family. And it doesn't mean that every dream is dashed. I think that's what I really want. Yeah, that's what I want our families to hear today.
And then, you just reminded me of something else, Katie, because there's a lot of bad press out there. So it's really heartbreaking. I have families come in and they say, we got this diagnosis and that means that we can't take that trip and we can't go on that vacation that we wanted to go, because what if somebody needs nursing home care and then the state's going to look back over 5 years and then it's going to cause a problem. And I mean, those are the cases that pull up my heartstrings, because there's so much misinformation, and these clients are so relieved to learn that no, those aren't the types of things that cause a problem with Mass Health. Gifting assets away, taking steps to shelter assets, those are the things that, raise the red flag. Paying for your kids' college tuition, I tend to be on the side of not so worried about that. When it comes to a family vacation that involves you and your spouse and your kids, I mean, that is something you need to do, and it's so liberating to hear that. No, go on that vacation, buy that car, go out for dinner every night of the week if that's what you want to do. You're never going to be in a situation where Mass Health says, you live too lavish of a lifestyle, we're not going to pay for your care. So I used to work for a lawyer who I love in Raynham, Massachusetts, who used to say, everybody's always spending for the rainy day, but the rainy day is here. So go for it.
Yeah. That's really, really powerful, Pam. And so as we want to encourage families that working with an attorney after a diagnosis can help you to continue to live your life, right? It's not about the attorney's going to say, don't go to Starbucks anymore. Don't
buy
buy
that
that.
latte.
Don't buy that latte. Don't get that special Christmas present. It's
Don't buy
about
those shoes
saying,
that you're yearning for the entire pandemic and said, am I ever going to go anywhere where I could wear these shoes again?
right, yeah. But it's that you could really get some tools, right? I even think about that families sometimes don't understand that Social Security can play a role in their planning.
Yeah.
I know attorneys can help talk with families about that. So
there's also, I think there's a lot of, and hopefully we're sort of breaking the mold on this a little bit, but I think that historically the thought was like, you stayed at home and your family took care of you, and then you went to a nursing home. And I really spend a lot of time educating families on, okay, well, these are the poles of the diagnosis, but there's so much in between that we can take advantage of. There's hiring private caregivers a handful of hours a week to lighten the load for the caregiver themselves, and sometimes just adding a little bit of extra help. We all know that in our life. I mean, I have 2 young kids, and I feel so indulgent to send one of them an extra day to the after school program, but those 3 hours makes a huge difference in my life. So we all know what that feels like to need a break, and to use our hard-earned savings to do that. And it's not an all or nothing thing. So we can add a few hours in here and a few hours in here and a few hours here, and maybe that works for 6 months, and then we add a little bit more, and then we add a little bit more, and then maybe there's a moment where we need to talk about a placement, and there's this huge fear about nursing homes, and folks are really surprised when they walk into a memory care assisted living facility and they realize, wow, this is a lovely, beautiful, peaceful, homey place that will be a wonderful quality of life. And I have this vision of, my grandmother's nursing home where they're, everybody's sitting up against a wall in a wheelchair, and that's just so not what's going on in these memory care assisted living facilities. So it's a lot of fear, and often the education can combat the fear. And then the last piece is that the state has programs for these things. The state has a home care program. The state has a program that pays for assisted living facility care and daycare programs. So working with a qualified elder law attorney, and estate planning attorney, disability attorney, you could pull these pieces in. And I often say it's like coming up with the right cocktail for the family, and it changes, it changes month to month. So all of that, I believe, is really empowering.
yeah, I love what you just said about that people have this idea about what happens if I need a memory care or skilled nursing. That's a failure. That's definitely going to be a horrible day. But I have witnessed amazing memory care and skilled nursing facilities take in young families and integrate them into programming. I've seen them organize Halloween parties that were appropriate for minor children of their young onset
Yep.
dementia patients to attend. I've seen them write in the goals of care in the care plan, family time, and have staff support that. And so I think that these conversations are really rich. And that's, I think, another thing that families don't expect. If they've never worked with an attorney before, they might not know, oh, we can talk about all these things
Mhm.
because there can be a lot of overlap for
Yep.
planning.
It really can be.
So I think the challenge though for families is how do they find. So I hope that through this conversation, families will consider taking that first hard step, right? To like, let's do it. Let's find someone to talk to. How do you find not only an elder law attorney, but maybe an elder law attorney who can help you navigate these nuances of a young onset diagnosis?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And there's not a whole, I think because this area of the law has sort of grown up a lot over the last 10 years. I think, it's not every elder law attorney has the community-based knowledge, and not every elder law attorney has the young onset cases, and it's a little bit of trial and error. I mean, I can tell you that, finding an elder law attorney in Massachusetts is an easy thing to do. There's a website. We can send you the website where you can literally type
Yep,
in your
we'll put it.
town and it'll pop up, the closest elder law attorneys to you. There are 450 elder law attorneys that are part of the Massachusetts chapter of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys in Massachusetts. These are people that go to meetings and are on a listserv, and we are really well connected group, and we stay up to date on all of the nuances and changes. So I think it's a matter of finding somebody that is close to you proximity wise, and then, talking to a handful of people, and the things that you really want to think about are, is this going to be a person that I'm going to want to walk through this journey with? Because this could be a 5 to 10 to 15 year long journey. I'm laughing because right before I got on this, I got an email from a family. The dad died. He was 100 years old, and
Oh,
that family, and it's heartwarming. That family's been my client for 15 years. And I was thinking back over, what I've done with this family for all of these years. And each of these families they're my family. They're part of my family. And I feel, I've been involved with them for all of the steps of the way. So you want to find somebody first and foremost that you feel connected with, somebody you feel you could be candid with and can walk through this journey as an advocate for you and as a counselor for you. And then you want to make sure they have the knowledge set too, because, like I said, not everybody's skill set is the same. So, I refer out cases that people call me and they say I have a contested guardianship and I know who to send that to. That's not me. So you
right.
want to interview people and ask questions. Have you ever had, what percentage of your practice is young onset cases? Have you ever had a client with FTD? Because if you've never had a client with FTD, it's a different animal. It can be a very different animal. I've sat in rooms with my clients that have frontal temporal dementia, and you might not know that that's the diagnosis. So you want to come up with a list of questions of things that are important to you, and interview the lawyer. And if they're a good lawyer, they'll allow you to do that, because it's not always a good fit. You want to find the right one.
I love that idea of that, you're engaging in a relationship and this is another member of your care team, right? So in the MGH FTD unit, we're providing you with clinical care, but you can have a counselor, you can have a guide for the legal financial planning. And I bet that you sometimes recommend other people to help and be added to the
Absolutely.
team.
We,
Yeah.
I share office space with Jennifer Pilcher, who is the president of the ALCA, the Aging Life Care Advocates Group, which are previously called geriatric care managers, but they're a phenomenal resource. And, you know, the team approach of an elder law attorney and an aging life care advocate together is just like, it's a dream team. So, you know, when Jen and I have a case together and we can help a family navigate through these such challenging waters, and on the clinical side and the legal side and the financial side, it takes so much pressure off of a family. And I would say lean on the people that you trust. So if you go to the caregiver support group, ask the other folks in the support group, ask Katie, ask your physicians. You know, we're all connected together. And when I have folks that come in and they are suspecting a young onset diagnosis or an FTD diagnosis and they haven't quite nailed it down yet, the first words out of my mouth are, you got to get an appointment at the MGH unit, and here's Katie Brandt's contact information.
Right. You do that. Yes.
I do it all the
Yeah.
time.
I want to thank you, Pam. I know that you have worked on raising awareness about FTD and young onset dementias, the atypical conditions that our clinic cares for amongst your elder law attorney community, and brought that education. And that is just really so powerful, because I know for our families to walk in and feel like they're not facing another person who's never heard of their diagnosis, that can really make them feel much safer, much more connected.
That's our goal.
Do you have a take home message today for our community?
I mean, I think
Yeah.
we've said a lot about this. I think knowledge is power, and I get it more than anybody. You know, I get wanting to put your head down and put your hands over your ears and say, today is not the day. And maybe today isn't the day, but stand up in the morning and maybe tomorrow is the day. And it doesn't have to be as scary as, you know, we tell ourselves these stories, right? We tell ourselves we're going to see this lawyer and it's going to be a scary experience, but it doesn't have to be that. And it's a matter of finding the right fit and the right relationship. So, and if you're not in my neck of the woods, I'm in Needham, Massachusetts, and you're somewhere else in the state, and we are all 450 elder law attorneys. We are all so willing, and we want people to find the right connection and the right person. So, you know, I call me, even if it's for a referral. Please feel free to do that.
Well, thank you, Pam. This was awesome. And I think that we brought a lot of good information to the community today. We're so appreciative of your time.
Thank you for having me, as always. Hopefully next time in person, Katie.
Yes, exactly. The MGH FTD unit Community Forum Fridays are a way that we bring community experts for conversations around topics that are relevant to living a life with Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal dementia, or related conditions. We're so glad that you joined us today, and we hope to see you again soon.